This lecture covers the distinction between demand and quantity demanded. It's one of the basics of economics. You're learning a whole lot in this macroeconomics course, but some of the foundation things are demand, supply, and combining supply and demand. I think these concepts are perhaps the most crucial and can be the most confusing without being in the actual classroom. That's why the staff here at Southwest Tech has put these into an online lecture for you to access. So let's go ahead and look at demand. Let's look at the definition of demand. It is the relationship between various amounts that buyers, that's demanders, are willing and able to purchase of some product at all possible prices. When you hear the word demand, you should be thinking of the entire demand curve and know that it does differ from quantity demanded. We'll look at quantity demanded in just a little bit. Another thing you should be aware of is that you already know the law of demand. Isn't this how you live? At higher prices, buyers want to purchase less of some good or service, and at lower prices they want to purchase more of some good or service. So as the price goes down, the quantity demanded increases, and as the price decreases, the quantity demanded increases. So price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Now notice I said there's a difference between demand and quantity demanded. One of the things you'll be finding out is that quantity demanded is price specific. So as the price goes down maybe from $5 to $4, the quantity demanded is going to increase, we'll say, from maybe 10 units to 12 units. We'll take a look at that. When we hear the word demand, we're talking about the entire demand curve. Graphically, when we look at a demand curve, it's going to be downward sloping from left to right. Generally speaking, I would say 99% of the demand curves that you see will be downward sloping. It's downward sloping because the variables involved, price and quantity, move in the opposite direction. Okay, for instance, here we have our y-axis, which is what we put price on, and then here we have the quantity axis. And like I said, the demand curve is downward sloping. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. But as you know, this is our point of origin and this is 0. At this point right here, the price is $0 and the quantity is 0 units. I'm just going to put a price out here of $10 and we'll just get it started. I'm just going to draw a price line across to my demand curve, and then I'm going to go down, and this is the quantity. Just for simplicity's sake, let's go ahead and put 5 out there. So at $10, the quantity demanded is 5. Now when you do your graphs, obviously you're going to have numbers already associated with these, but I just want to illustrate again the relationship between price and quantity, because the demand curve, is the relationship between various prices and various quantities. Let's say the price drops to $8. So price goes down to $8. I'm going to draw a price line across till I hit my demand curve, and then I will go down to my quantity axis, and I'll just put $15 or 15 units out there. As you can see, a price drop caused an increase in the quantity demanded. Price is going down, quantity demanded is increasing. Those variables are moving in the opposite direction. And whenever you see variables that are moving in the opposite direction, when you graph that, in other words, when you take that data and make it a picture, a graphical visualization, you're going to see something downward sloping. The opposite is true too. Let's say the price originally had been $8. Well, the quantity demanded is 15. If the price increases to $10, what happened? Well, draw a price line across to my demand curve and again go down to my quantity axis, and I see that the quantity demanded declined. Again, the variables are going in the opposite direction. This time we saw a price hike. We therefore saw that create a decrease in the quantity demanded. It's downward sloping. Now, just a little bit more on this before I continue. When we're looking at this thing right here, this is the whole demand curve. When you hear about the demand for oil or the demand for housing or the demand for milk or whatever, know that we are talking about various quantities that buyers are willing and able to purchase at various prices. It's not just one price, it's all possible prices. Okay, let's just get back to the PowerPoint here. A few more things about the demand curve. The fact that the price and the quantity are moving in opposite directions, that's what we call a negative relationship. Inverse or indirect is another way that we could describe that, but whenever you graph relationships like that, they're going to be downward sloping. Okay, and again, there is our relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay, now what is quantity demanded? Quantity demanded is different from demand. It is not the entire demand curve, it's price specific. So quantity demanded is a specific quantity that will be demanded by buyers at a specific price. For instance, on this kind of messy looking graph here, we said that at a specific price of $8, the quantity demanded was 15 units. So quantity demanded, price specific. Whereas demand was the entire demand curve, various prices, various quantities. Demand is represented by an entire curve, whereas quantity demanded is a point on the demand curve. Now, just taking a look at this table, you can see that there are various prices. They range from $10 to $50, and they increase by $10 increments. And you can see that we have various quantities demanded at specific prices. Now, if I were to ask you, what is the quantity demanded of shirts, you would have to ask me, at what price? Well, for instance, at $30, the quantity demanded is $120. At $10, the quantity demanded is $200. Again, just remember, quantity demanded is price specific. If we were to graph this entire relationship here, we would see an entire demand curve. And again, it would be downward sloping because of that negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. So you can see the price is increasing 10 to 20 to 30 to 40 to 50, and at the same time the quantity demanded is declining. All right, here's just a demand curve for shirts, and as you can see, it's downward sloping. At a price of $50, the quantity demanded is about, we'll say, 40-ish, if I may. At a price of $40, the quantity demanded, because that price went down, the quantity demanded increased. We're getting further away from zero on our quantity axes. Okay? So here's the entire demand curve. A little bit of a review between demand and quantity demanded. Again, demand is quantities buyers will purchase or demand at various prices. It's the entire curve. It's downward sloping from left to right. And again, that is due to that negative relationship between price and quantity. Whereas quantity demanded is a quantity buyers will take off the market at a specific price. It is not the entire curve. It's merely a point on the demand curve. Okay? Now, how does quantity demanded change? Well, there's only one thing that causes quantity demanded to change, and that's a change in the price of the good itself. As you saw in our rather messy looking graph at this point, let's just put a label out here of, we'll say pizza. At a price of $10, the quantity demanded was 5 units. The price decreased to $8. The quantity demanded increased. We just moved from this point on the demand curve to this point on the demand curve. That is not a whole shift in the demand curve. It's not that there's been an increase in the quantity demanded at every price. It's not that there's been a decrease in the quantity demanded at every price. It's just that as the price went from $10 to $8, we moved from this point on our demand curve to this one. At $10, the quantity demanded was 5 units. At $8, the quantity demanded has increased to 15. So from one point to another, that is the only way that quantity demanded changes. And that again is there's been a change in the price of the good itself. There's been a change in the price of pizza. I didn't say that there's been a change in income or that there's been a change in the number of buyers. I didn't say that maybe a complementary good has changed in price. It's the price of pizza and pizza alone that has changed the quantity demanded. Let's go back to the PowerPoint here. When the price of the good itself changes, we see a movement along the existing demand curve like I just illustrated. Remember too that quantity demanded is a point on the demand curve. It's not the entire demand curve. Now the question then is, okay, if that's how quantity demanded changes, just a change in the price of the good itself, how does the entire demand change? Well, certain events will cause maybe an increase in demand or a decrease in demand. And there's some nice little memory tricks with econ. If the event leads to a rise in demand, we're going to see that that demand curve shifts to the right. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. Okay, I have my y-axis, and price, again, is always on the y-axis. Quantity is always on the x. Okay, and again, downward sloping demand curve, D, demand downward. Now let's say that we are looking at, here's one. And this one is rather recent, actually. Let's look at the demand for sugar. When I say recent, I should probably tell you that it's fall of 2009. This is the demand for sugar. At various prices, like we'll take a look at, $5 a pound, the quantity demanded is right here. We'll say it's 100 units. At a price of $2.50, I'll just divide that in half so I can kind of eyeball it for the midpoint. At a price of $2.50, the quantity demanded is way out here. We'll just say 400 units. Okay? If there's been just a price change of sugar, nothing else, we move from this point to this point. Price was at $5, quantity demanded was 100. Price went down to $2.50, quantity demanded increased to 400. Okay? You know that already. There's been a change in the price of the good itself. But let's say something else happens. Let's say that we find out, and this is totally hypothetical. I don't want any rumors starting. We'll just say that some sort of medical journal states that a diet high in sugar increases brain power. I think my kids would like that, but that's not the case. So again, no rumors, please. If we find out that sugar is actually some health food, what might happen? Well, the demand might increase. More people will maybe be able to justify eating more sugar. I'm not sure. But the fact is demand is going to rise. Rise in demand, shift to the right. So here's my original demand curve. Here's my new one. Rise in demand, shift to the right. Now, what exactly does that mean? It doesn't mean that there's been a price change. It doesn't mean that, the price of sugar dropped, therefore the quantity demanded went up. What it means is this. There will be an increase in the quantity demanded at each and every price. Rise in demand, shift to the right. And that totally makes sense because here we have 0 for our quantity and 0 for our price. When we move to the right, we're getting further away from 0, right? So originally at a price of $5, the quantity demanded was 100. Now at $5, the quantity demanded is way out here. What do you know? Just accidentally, that happens to be 400 units. At a price of $2.50 a pound, the quantity demanded is way out here, and we'll say that's about 800 units. So we have seen an increase in the quantity demanded at what price? At each and every price, because the entire demand shifted. Where have we seen that? Well, a few examples. We've seen an increase in the demand for fuel oil, and in large part that's due to an industrial revolution that's going on in the Pacific Rim area, China. Take a look at this. Price, quantity. We'll look at oil. Here's our original demand curve for oil. Well, again, China's going through an industrial revolution. They're building lots of things. They're producing lots of things. They're manufacturing tons of stuff, whether it's, roads and bridges and buildings. It's also some social services. It's cars. They are increasing in, the number of cars not only they're building, but that they're actually purchasing. So we've seen an increase in the demand for oil worldwide. So we're talking about the entire market demand for oil. There's a very good example. Now, sometimes we're going to see an event that causes less demand. So if the event leads to less demand, then the demand curve is going to shift to the left. Less demand, shift to the left. Take a look at an example here. Price, quantity, demand curve. Here's a good example. Several years ago, we saw some animosity between the French and the Americans, and it was, due to some political issues and due to some war issues and support of the coalition forces. But what we Americans said was, you know what? I'm not buying any French wine, and I'm not going to even call them French doors. We're going to call them freedom doors. I'm not going to call them French fries. We're going to call them freedom fries. Maybe you remember that, maybe you don't. But one of the things that Americans did was they decreased their demand for French wine. It's not that the price changed of French wine at all. It's something else. The demand curve shifted to the left. So here's my new demand curve. Less demand, shift to the left. Now notice that there's a decrease in the quantity demanded at each and every price. Originally at a price, we'll say, of $5 a bottle, the quantity demanded was way out here. We'll just say 100 units. Originally at a price of $10 a bottle, the quantity demanded was way out here. We'll just say that's about 60 units. Okay, again, we're getting closer to zero here, the point of origin. Now what's happened, and again, we've recovered from that, but at that point, many Americans said, I will not buy French wine, I will buy American wine instead. And we do have some great local wines here. You know, California produces a lot of wine. At $5, the quantity demanded for French wine had dropped. We'll say that's about 58 units. At $10, the quantity demanded had dropped for French wine, we'll say, to about 25 units. I know this is getting a little messy. I'm just going to take an orange highlighter and go over my new demand curve. Decrease in demand, right? Decrease in the quantity demanded at each and every price. At $10, quantity demanded is 25. Originally, before there was this difference, the quantity demanded at $10 had been 60. Originally at $5, the quantity demanded had been 100, but there's been a shift to the left. There's been less demand, a decline in demand for French wine. Therefore, we see a decrease in the quantity demanded, not just at one price, at each and every price. It's not that somebody said, oh, French wine is hazardous to your health. That's not the issue here. It's not that the price of wine changed. It's something else. Okay? Let's take a look at some of those reasons why we might see a shift. Again, this slide just illustrates a rise in demand. Okay, so originally we have a downward sloping demand curve, and that's just notified or identified as a D. Then we have a rise in demand, and that's D prime. Rise in demand, shift to the right. There will be an increase in the quantity demanded at each and every price level. We'll just take $30 here. Originally, the quantity demanded had been about $120. Now at $30, the quantity demanded is increased, and at every other price as well. If the event leads to a decrease or less demand, we're going to see again a shift to the left. My original demand curve is the blue curve, signified by a D. Less demand, shift to the left. And that just makes complete sense, because the further we go to the left, what's happening to our numbers? The quantities are getting smaller. Less demand, shift to the left. Decrease in the quantity demanded at what price? Each and every. All right, now let's take a look at the 5 factors that cause the demand to shift. Whenever there's a change, or let me put it this way, the demand curve will shift when there is a change in income, when there's a change in tastes and preferences, when there's a change in the prices of related goods. Please note, I did not say a change in the price of the good itself, because when there's a change in the price of the good itself, that impacts quantity demanded, not the whole demand curve. If there's a change in the price of the good itself, we just move from one point on that demand curve to another point. Price expectations. I did not say anything at all about an actual change in price, but it's what we expect to happen to prices. And then market size is another one. And a market, get this down pat, a market occurs whenever buyers and sellers come together. So when we talk about a change in the market size, as far as demand goes, we're talking about a change in the number of buyers. For instance, we might see the number of buyers of cell phones increase. Well, that's going to increase the demand for cell phones. We also might see a decrease in the market size for people that are purchasing, we'll say, cassette tapes. The number of buyers has declined, therefore the demand for cassette tapes has declined. Okay, so this wraps up our mini lecture on demand, introducing it, and then also quantity demanded. In other lectures, we're going to look specifically at these factors. So we'll have one little lecture on income, one on tastes and preferences, one on prices of related goods, one on price expectations, and one on market size, because these are the factors that cause the entire demand curve to shift. Now you might be saying, why do I even care whether the demand curve shifts? I'll tell you why. Where we're going in the future is we're going to be looking at demand and supply. Okay, and you guys know the demand curve now. Here's my downward sloping demand curve. And let's just look at the market, we'll say, for milk. Okay, here's my downward sloping demand curve. Price is on the y-axis and quantity is on this one. What you're going to be learning in the not too distant future is that the supply is upward sloping. Where these two intersect is very important. This is what we call the market clearing or equilibrium price. This is what Adam Smith referred to as the invisible hand. This is our market clearing price. We'll say it's at $12 per bulk weight. And the market clearing quantity is right here. We'll just say it's at 1,000 units. Now what you're going to be finding out is that when demand changes, the market price is going to change. For instance, if the demand increases for milk, like the milk board would like it to, happen. That's why you see these commercials for like women that drink 3 servings of milk or receive 3 servings of calcium a day are healthier, or they weigh less, or whatever. The Got Milk campaign, what they're doing is trying to increase the demand for milk. Well, what happened to the equilibrium price when that occurred? Well, originally it was $12, but what happened here? Supply stayed the same. That's a key thing you want to keep in mind. But what happened here is the bulk rate went up to maybe $14 per bulk weight, and the equilibrium quantity increased as well. We'll just say this is like 1,300. So why do you need to know? Is it quantity demanded that changed, or is it demand? Because it's all part of that invisible hand of what we call a market in a market economy. Market economy, buyers and sellers come together. And that's what sets the prices and also dictates what's actually going to be sold or produced in an economy. Is the government going to make those decisions, or is it going to be up to the market? Buyers and sellers, individuals. Okay? If you want a little more on that, make sure you read about Adam Smith.